There was once a boy who loved to draw.
His name was Georgie.
True. Georgie lived on a farm with many brothers and sisters, all of whom were amazingly helpful to their mother and father.
But not Georgie.
It's true. Georgie could spend hours just squatting down in the dirt, drawing and drawing and drawing with a stick. And what he drew was always the same thing.
Cats.
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 And more. Cats. Big cats. Thin cats. Small cats, fat cats. 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 Cats.
It's true.
And more.
Georgie, said his father yet again, you must stop drawing all of these cats. How are you ever going to learn to be a farmer?
I'm sorry, Father. I'll try to stop.
Now, Georgie was a good boy, and he did try to stop. But the first time that one of the farm cats went by, he forgot all about his chores and he had to sit down and draw more
A cat.
Georgie is never going to be a farmer, said his father to his mother one night. What are we to do with him? Well, his mother replied, maybe he could be a priest. Why don't you take him into the village and see if they'll have him at the temple? And so the next day, Georgie's father walked him into the village and up to the temple and had a word to the priest. And the priest considered the matter and said, I will gladly teach him. And from that point on, Georgie lived at the temple.
He even got his own box of writing tools. He had a brush, an ink stick, and a stone. Georgie loved to make the ink. He poured water in the hollow of the stone. He dipped in the ink stick. Wait, what is it?
Dipped in the ink stick.
And then he stirred it,
Rubbed it on the stone.
rubbed it on the stone, and he had ink for his writing, for his brush.
Now, all of the children at the temple worked very, very hard to be good at reading and writing. And they practiced a lot. Except
Georgie.
Because he would spend hours and hours and hours with his pen, with his brush, and his rice paper, drawing just one thing over and over and over. He drew cats.
Cats. And more cats. Big cats, small cats, thin cats, fat cats. Cats, 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 cats.
Oh, Georgie, said the priest, you must stop drawing all of these cats. How will you ever learn how to be a priest?
I'm sorry, Honourable Sir. I'll try to stop.
Georgie, being a good boy, did indeed try to stop. But every time he saw one of the temple cats wander by,
He couldn't help but draw it.
and though that's bad enough, one day when Georgie ran out of the rice paper that he had been given to learn his letters with, he started drawing cats on all of the folding rice paper screens in the temple. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cats. There were cats everywhere.
Too much cats, too much cats, too much.
Georgie, said the priest sadly, you, I don't think, will ever be a priest. There's nothing for it, you must go home. And so Georgie packed up his few meagre belongings, including his writing kit, and he was all set to go home, but he didn't want to go home. he thought his father would probably be angry at him. He thought it was probably entirely valid. But then it occurred to him that in the next village there was also a temple, and maybe the priests there would have room for him. So he set off, and he walked all the afternoon and all through the hot day. And eventually, when it was already dark and night, he got to the next village. And he went up the stairs of the temple, and he knocked on the door.
But there was no answer.
So he pushed on the heavy door and he opened it. But inside, the temple was entirely dark.
That's strange. There were no lanterns lit. Why isn't anybody here?
He looked down at his feet, and there beside the door was a lamp. So he quickly managed to light it. And what he saw by its first light made him clap his hands in glee. Because the entire temple, all before him in this great big open hall, was white paper folding screens. Just rice paper everywhere. And without stopping to think or really consider if it was a good idea,
He drew cats.
he took out his writing kit, he mixed up his ink, and he began to draw. And what he drew was the same thing, over and over. It was, of course,
All together now. Cats!
cats, cats, cats.
And more cats! Big cats, small cats, thin cats, fat cats. Cats.
Finally,
Yeah.
Finally, when there was only one screen left in the entire hall, Georgie looked at it, because this screen was nearly as big as the hall itself. And he considered it. And then he dipped his brush in his ink, and he began to draw the most enormous, most big and beautiful cat
He had ever drawn.
And when he finished, he took a few steps back to admire his work. And that's when he realized that he was very, very tired. Not
Nice
surprising.
to know.
Thank you. And it was time to get some sleep. Well, he tried to make his bed in the middle of the hall, but something about the space made him all uncomfortable. And he decided what he needed to do was find somewhere smaller to sleep. So he looked around, and he eventually found a cupboard just off the hall. And he opened the door, climbed inside, slid the door shut, and within moments he was deep, deep asleep. Now, it might have been for a short time, it might have been for a long time, but later that night, in pitch blackness, he woke up terrified. Out in the hall, he heard what seemed like an enormous beast sniffing and snaffling around. Suddenly he realized
He knew why nobody was there. He didn't want to be there either.
he heard it snuffling and squeaking and scritching, sniffing for him. He heard the scritch, scritch, scritch of giant claws moving across the floor, straight towards the cupboard, closer and closer, closer. He heard the claws stop, and the indrawn breath through two giant nostrils just the other side of the rice paper screen. And then, suddenly, there was a huge commotion. There was an explosion of giant bodies rolling across the floor, and a huge impact that shook the floor beneath Georgie's feet in the cupboard itself. There was a wail and a shriek of pain. There was squeals. There was all sorts of noises of battle happening happening right outside the door. It was terrifying. The two giant bodies rolled across the floor, and then this ear-piercing, unbearable, screeching squeal, and then the sound of something lifeless hitting the floor. Georgie listened as hard as he could and thought that he could hear the soft pad, pad, pad of giant feet moving about on the floor outside, followed by silence. Nothing in the world would make him dare to open the door. And he sat there for hours and hours and hours, shaking in fear, trembling, until at last daylight outlined the outside of the cupboard door, and he found the courage to slide it open and peek out into the hall. In the middle of the floor, in the hall, there was a monster, quite dead.
A rat the size of a cow!
It had teeth that were like boar tusks. It had claws that would be more suited on a tiger. And it was obviously dead and defeated in the middle of the floor. Georgie climbed out of the cupboard and looked around, but there was nothing and no one except his hundreds of cat drawings. Cats. And then he looked at the cat on the very big screen, and he thought,
Didn't you draw the cat's head to the pointing to over there to the left and the tail facing over there to the right? Now it's all swapped over.
and that's when Georgie walked over to the screen and put his hands together in thanks and bowed, and he said,
I forgot my line. You did not say that, okay?
Georgie never studied with the priest properly. And he said, "Thank you, honourable cat. You have saved my life. And in return, I shall never let anyone stop me from drawing cats." Now, when the villagers had heard that the monster that had been terrorising their village and stealing their flocks for months had been killed, they made Georgie a hero. The priest who had been hiding out in a different part of the village let Georgie continue living there, but he didn't have to become a priest.
Or a farmer.
It's true. Georgie became an artist. And he became the most honoured and renowned artist in the whole country. And all he ever drew was
Cats.
Thank you.